Humans are born communicators, so just think for a second how much you've communicated with each other just this week. You know, you walk up to someone and you just know what to say. Something comes to mind. You have a question or you want to share some information with them. So the question is, why do we have difficulty then writing? We're also communicating there. And what can we do about it? You know, my theory is that the challenge with technical writing is not really with the communication itself. We're good at that. We have that down. But rather, it's the constraints that we're imposing on ourselves when we try to write. We're suffocating that writer that's inside of us, and as a result, we suffocate our writing. So like programmers, right? We're programmers. Let's hack our way out of this mess with a few tricks that get our fingers and our brains working together, you know, so that we can write more fluently. So the first, rule number 1, is to write in plain text. So free your mind. By what you want to do is you have the information in your head. The information is in all of our heads that we want to write. Once we've written something, it's rare that that information wasn't there somewhere buried deep inside. So we want to use the closest format that we can use to thought. Okay, so that's plain text. And it's funny that we use this for writing source code, but when it comes to writing content, we tend to take a different approach. So if you're writing, let's say, an ASCII doc, for example, perhaps even Markdown, but I'm more inclined to choose ASCII doc. You're already employing the primary thing that I do personally to hack my brain to write fluently. So if you're doing that, super. If not, your journey with plain text starts now. And so all the hacks that follow after rule number 1 become possible when you switch over to doing plain text for writing. So using a plain text format like ASCII doc, what it's all about is you're efficiently encoding that information, transcribing it really into its purest form. There's nothing else that's really there. It's in its raw source code, really, the source code of writing. And there's little to no ceremony to get it going. You know, when we pick programming languages, we tend to choose conciseness as a key factor for deciding one over the other. So we want to make sure that we choose also a good language. You know, you don't want to have a language that's overly verbose. So you could liken perhaps XML, writing in XML, to writing code in Java, which is much more verbose than perhaps saying something like Groovy or Scala, etc. And you also lose language, you know, you don't have as much access to powerful language features. So we want to choose our writing language like we choose our programming language. And what's critical about this, you know, going to plain text, is that it's a clean separation now from the content and the presentation. I hear a lot of companies, a lot of projects that they write their source code, and they're very proud of that, of course. But then they turn around and they talk about their source code and they choose something like WordPress. And I sort of want to challenge you as programmers and IT people to say, why aren't you using the same techniques that you use for writing your code when you write content? Why do you give it up and then just say, I'm just going to drag and drop stuff around? You don't do that for your source code. Why are you doing it for your content? So we'll get to that later, but just keep that in mind. Start thinking about that. But what we want you to be able to do is focus on very minimal content and get a really beautiful result. So we like to say that with ASCII doc, you can write once and you can publish everywhere. So whether it's HTML or PDF or whatever, all that comes later. So when you're writing, you're not writing for writing in PDF. You're writing for capturing the content, and then you can convert it. So when we move from paper and pencil to the computer, you know, we gain some things. You know, we gain a lot of things, like, for instance, not having to rewrite the entire thing to edit it. Remember, there was a time when we had to do that. But we lost a lot of things, too. And one of the things that we lost was the ability just to kind of whip out a piece of paper and just jot down some notes. Start scribbling our ideas down. Or at least we lost this capability for a couple of decades getting tied up in all this other crap. So what is some of that stuff that was going on? Well, all of a sudden, you need to think about things like the file name, where you wanted to store in the file system. You wanted to make sure that you were saving constantly until autosave sort of came around. But worse than that is you had an interface. Think about something like Word for a second, where all of a sudden you had to worry about formatting in order to do any writing. You had to worry about the structure of something and how it was going to be, what font you were using, what size of the font, etc., before you could even start thinking about writing anything. And you had features like autocorrect and grammar correction that was just basically always prodding you to do something irrelevant. Because this is not writing, someone had said this last night, writing is not editing. And it's very important to think about that. When you're writing, who cares if it's crappy? Who cares if it's wrong? As long as it's true. And so the most important thing is to get that information out of your head. You'll edit it and make it beautiful and sound wonderful later, and we'll get to those tips. So, basically what I'm saying was lost is that all of a sudden we had to satisfy some tool that we were using and make it happy so that we could write, when in fact the goal of this is to write comfortably. So, and then some tried to write in languages that are like XML and HTML and DocBook and stuff like that. And we put so much damn clutter in between the words that you're trying to write and everything else that's there that you start to just lose the words. So this is part of what I'm saying demotivates you as a writer, or you start to think this is a very difficult thing. When you write source code, when you're going to whip out and write a program real quick, you can get right to it, and you're not. The IDEs really help you get into the flow. That's so we're just trying to do the same thing here. So AsciiDoc, on the other hand, is a very approachable language. And it's a very approachable format. And this is going to be important if we're talking about motivation for writing. So the way that I like to look is it just makes a lot of sense for writers, and it makes sense to writers. So if you look at this, for instance, you can see kind of the general structure of this, and I don't even really have to teach you about AsciiDoc if you don't know it already. You would kind of understand what each part is already. You can see that that a paragraph is just a paragraph, and that it's spaced out by other paragraphs. And you can do lists the way that we write them down on a piece of paper. We just put little stars, and we write stuff after it. So this is a nice starting point, right? It kind of gets out of your way. But the other thing is that AsciiDoc loves source code. And so since we're often writing about technical things that include source code, then it should have features right out of the box, native, that say, yes, we recognize source code and we do things with it. We can syntax highlight it. We can include parts of it from a language. One of the great examples is like the Groovy documentation. All the source code examples that you see in the Groovy documentation are actually being pulled from the test suite. There is nowhere in the documentation that someone copied and pasted sample source code directly into the document. And think about now when you're writing that you don't have to go find where you want to copy paste it in, and then worry when you're writing whether that still compiles. So you want to separate those things out. So there's some nice workflow things here. But what's beautiful about it is that it's just source code. So you can do all the things that you do with your source code now with your content. So it's easy to pass around and share. It's easy to check into Git. You already have kind of a workflow with something like GitHub where you can work with other people and you don't have to have some sort of way of doing that. You don't need a SharePoint or some Dropbox or whatever. You just put it into Git just like you do your source code, and you have a way to collaborate on it. You can track the changes, etc. So we'll talk more about some of those workflows later, but it's really, really important that you know this. You know this system. This is something you already know, so you're going to be less worried and less anxious about writing if it's something you already know. So the idea here, in my mind, is that you want to writing fluently is about channeling the thoughts directly from your fingertips into the computer, just like we used a pen or a pencil before when we were in our youth, so to speak. That's why I just love plain text, because it makes me feel like I'm writing on a piece of paper, but yet I'm getting all the benefits that I have, that the computer has, the good benefits. The good things about the computer. So for instance, you can automate. And you can, as I mentioned, you can use workflows like Git. But above all, I'm writing. I just open up a document, and there I go. Now, I tend to like to use Vim, and one of the reasons that I use Vim is because it's probably the fastest application that I can possibly start. And for me, as soon as I have a thought, I want it to be recorded. And so especially because writing sort of hits you. It's sort of passion that comes. You have an idea, you want to get it down. I'm not going to wait for an IDE to start. But if you prefer that, or if you already have an IDE open and that's your home base, so to speak, then you can do that too. I don't have to tell you what tools you can use. You get to use whatever you want. So we've got it open, but we still don't know what to put onto the page. Maybe the cursor's sort of blinking back at us going, okay, fill me in, so we don't know yet. So what do we do there? So hack number 2 is to answer a question. So if you think about it for a second, most of us are okay with writing emails. I mean, never do you think, okay, so you may have some difficult emails, but never do you think, you know what, I try to write emails and I get blanks. Rarely does this happen. We burn through, 20, 40, 50 emails a day, so we're constantly doing it. And that's writing, but for some reason we don't think of it that way. And I have a hypothesis as to why this is the case and how we can leverage this. But the same thing is true for, let's say, a social network, for Twitter. You simply, see the box and it says, hey, what's happening? You fill in the blank. So you're really communicate again. So what I'm saying before is you walk around the conference, you talk to each other, no problem. You go to the social networks or emails, you write, no problem. You write the documentation, problem. Okay? So now we're getting closer to the documentation. We still haven't cracked the nut yet. What is it that is preventing us from being able to write? Notice something about all these forms of communication that aren't writing the documentation, and there are responses to questions. Now, when we sit down to write a long form, such as a README or a tutorial, we clam up. But think about that for a second. We're writing a README, or we're writing a user manual. Let's use the example user manual better. I'm going to write a user manual. No, you're not, because there's no such thing as a user manual. A user manual is the thing that exists once you're done, and people refer to it as the user manual, but the user manual isn't a thing, right? What it is it's answers to questions that people have. That's what it is. Collectively, it aggregates to become a user manual. But what it is answers to people's questions. That's what a user manual really is. It's answers to their questions. So, you know the answers to the questions. So what questions do they have? Are you letting your project sort of keep Stack Overflow in business? Or, something equivalent, some forms? Or are you actually thinking about what those questions are that people have? So you want to write like you're answering a question. One of the ways to do that is to sort of think, what might people want to know about this project? And so you ask yourself, you write this down. That's the first thing you write. Not the answer, but you write the question. Okay? And the question is just sitting there. Now you have the question up there and the box below it. But now notice that the box below it is not just a blinking cursor on a white screen. The box below it is waiting for you. Your knowledge, what's in your head. It's sort of like a person coming up to you at a conference and saying, hey, what was your favorite talk this week? Right? Immediately, your brain's working. Your brain's working on an answer. If someone came up to you and they just stared at you, then, you'd clam up. What's going on? This is weird, okay? So ask yourself, what are they probably asking? So a simple one, how do I install their project? So you think to yourself, how do you install your project? Well, you have to type, oh, wait a minute, no, wait, that's right. There's some prerequisites. Do you have prerequisites? So then you write a question above the question. And so what I like to do is I like to start out with a whole bunch of questions. And then I answer the questions. And when I'm done answering the questions, I change all the questions to statements. I change, how do you install your project? I wish I had another slide here that changed that. But anyway, it would say, what might we say? How to install the project. You could say installation or how do you install the project. Okay, so you come up. So basically, you just go back. Those are your titles. Those are your sections. Maybe they're major sections, minor sections, etc. But your questions become your sections. And then your user manual, the aggregate, when this is all done, is actually useful because it's really answers to questions. Now, sometimes you do that and there's a problem because you still don't spend a lot of time in the editor writing. So how can we hack this a little further? Well, we say, well, you're writing email all the time. So instead of writing the question into a document, why don't you send yourself an email, like someone asks you a question, hey, I tried to install a project and I don't understand how to do it. How do I do it? And then you say, hey, this is an email. I just wrote a response. So you start writing a response, and so you don't have to sending yourself an email. That's one hack. But a lot of times we'll spend time on mailing lists. And what's funny is, you've ever been to the case where someone doesn't understand, and you start explaining it, and then you're like, oh wait, no, I have to explain this too. And then this long email is about to go to the mailing list. Stop. Don't send it to the mailing list. Copy it, paste it, make a new documentation page, and then send them a link to the documentation. Aha, now we found a hack to get ourselves to basically not bore everyone with these long responses and get documentation at the same time. So this is definitely a good practice, and also it's effective, right? It also is the hack. So the key, right, is that we need to find a way basically to get information pouring out of our head into the computer. And I think that questions are the most powerful tool to do that when you're stuck. Plus, the other thing that I like about the question is now when you're writing, you know when you're supposed to be done, because if the answer is, if you've answered it, then you move on. You go to the next thing. Okay, so moving on. So now we're flowing, we're in the flow of it. I have a trick which you may not be doing. So maybe you had some of these ideas. This one I think is, I don't see it around a lot. And this idea of sentence per line. So this is sort of a change your world a little bit here, because it did for me. So think about how you write code, right? When you write code, each statement, for the most part, is on its own line. There's reasons that we do this, but it's also easier to read. If we chain like 9 statements on a line, this would be very difficult to do a lot of things, okay? Same thing with writing. So Anders Navrath from the Neo4j project, he introduced me to this thing. So Neo4j project kind of he said that he got it from someone. This is the first time I ever saw it. And they use this for all their documentation. And this technique absolutely transformed my writing process. So in the sentence per line, you write a paragraph like you would write a bulleted list. So here's how we would normally write. We might have the text just wrapping. Even worse is if you wrap arbitrarily. So at 80 lines, we're just going to truncate this thing and force, do a hard wrap. Okay, so there are 2 ways of potentially where you're coming from. This one does a soft wrap. So here we have multiple sentences all jammed together into a single paragraph. So the sentence per line, what it does is it breaks them out so that they're all each on their own line. And you almost think it's like a bulleted list, except we got rid of all the bullets. And since in ASCII doc, the end lines, just like in HTML, are insignificant, they're just white space, then this doesn't affect the output. So no one's going to read this, no one's going to see all your sentences now on their own line in the published work. So this mode of writing absolutely is critical for doing a whole bunch of things. So what can you do? Well, first of all, it feels very natural because it matches the way that we write code. So when I say we, I'm talking about people who would be writing code, right? So you're used to that, so why don't we do the same thing? It keeps changes localized. So I am very strongly against arbitrary wrapping of content. I think it's a very, very bad idea. So, and here's the problem with it. Let's say if you have a very long paragraph and you change the first word, and the first word kicks the last word in that sentence off that line and onto the next line. And then when that new word shows up in the second line, it kicks the word off that end of that line to the next one. So now you change one word in a paragraph, and it looks like you changed 80, okay? Or you changed a whole bunch. That's really, really bad for collaboration. So in sentence per line, there's no way you could affect another line because every line's got its own identity, okay? So it becomes easier to diff, and it becomes less likely that diffs are arbitrarily showing changes, what I call reflows. So, but here's the really cool part. Just like in source code, you may say, wait a minute, this statement needs to go above this statement because that's the wrong order. Well, we do that in code sometimes, but we do it in writing a lot. Because to say one thing and then want to say something else, and then say, well, no, actually, it would be better if it was the other way around. We should have a way in our writing system that supports this. So if you see right here, I can just use my editor to just push a line and pull a line, push a line and pull a line. So I can go up and down. And I can even split, this paragraph's getting kind of long, gangly, so I can just basically put a blank line in between 2 of the lines, and now they're in separate paragraphs. I can pull them back together and can push them apart. So we can do a lot of things here. And it also opens up the possibility of using comments at the line level. So we'll get to that next. Now, I realize that what I'm about to say does depend on the human language that you're writing in. This, for English at least, it encourages you to write shorter lines. Now, I understand that languages like German tend to be much, much longer words, so therefore, it's very, very difficult to fit everything on one screen width. So if it wraps, if the line's soft wrap, that's okay. Okay, you can still tell the beginning of lines from where wrap lines are. You may get it more often. So it may make it a little bit more awkward to see. Here, everything's fitting on the screen width. But this is good because readers don't want to read long sentences. Okay, it's very tiring to read long sentences. So you want to shorten your sentences, and this encourages that. If your goal is to not shorten the sentences, but at least be aware, like shorten the sentences to a screen width, you're at least aware now of the length of your sentences. So maybe in German, it always wraps to 2 lines for most of your sentences, but then you don't want it to wrap to 3 lines, right? So you're at least you're counting subconsciously in your head the length of lines. So it's important. I think the other thing that's really interesting about this is that it warms up your writing, because instead of thinking about sitting down to write a paragraph is difficult because it has to work. Right? The whole paragraph has to work. There has to be an intro to the paragraph. It has to kind of go somewhere and then kind of wrap up. And that can be difficult. What we want to do is we want to go back to that idea of dumping information down. So a bulleted list is great. We can do bulleted lists all day long. I mean, just go around to many of the talks. Okay? Bulleted lists are very easy to create. So you just create a bunch of bullets of all the things that you know. And then you say, okay, the information is in front of me. Now how do I organize it into something that makes sense as a paragraph? So when you're doing sentence per line, you just remove all the bullets. Now you already have sort of a paragraph. Now you just move the lines around. Hey, you're getting closer and closer. So what we're doing is we're hacking our brains to get closer and closer to the final result without basically giving it all the anxiety of having to produce up front. Okay, so this is highly recommended. But it also makes comments possible. So one of the great things about AsciiDoc is that it supports both line and block comments, just like you have in most programming languages, Java and C, etc. So what this allows you to do is take content out of the flow temporarily, permanently. Maybe it was never intended to be in the flow. All the reasons that you use comments in source code, you use comments in writing. So there's no way, absolutely not a chance, that I could write anymore without having the ability to comment out content while I'm working on it. So my document has almost as much comments in it as it has visible text. And so comments, you can do all kinds of things with them. So let's think about what we can use comments for. Well, first of all, we could start out with ideas. So we're not even ready to write yet. We just put a comment block and we just start jotting down a bunch of things that we probably need to cover in this tutorial. Maybe those questions I mentioned, some brainstorming. They can be notes. They can be notes with yourself. They can be notes with other people. Reminders. So I'll often do this. I said, I need to go back at some point and I need to add, even like, let's say when I'm doing this talk and I'll put some at the top, make that point. So I just jotted at the top. I was running by my computer and I just jotted it down at the top of the document inside of a comment. Later I'll integrate it. Okay, so we kind of do this in code too. And the key is that all of this is directly adjacent to the source code. So there's the idea. This is kind of where I start. Oftentimes at the top of my document, I'll just put a little to-do list, and this is like things that I need to remember to do inside of my document. I might be working on something, and I go, this paragraph is just not working. Okay? I don't know how to fix it right now. I don't want to delete it. So you can soft delete it by just commenting the whole thing out. And maybe later I come back and I put it back in. But the other thing that's really, really interesting is to be able to use it to comment on the lines below and above a line. So I'll use this as I'm writing back and forth with my wife. Like, let's say that she picks up the document and she's going to edit it. And before she starts changing my words, she might give me a chance to sort of, she just does like a development edit on it. She'll basically say, here's where I think this needs to go, here's where I think this needs to go. So in this particular case, we had a paragraph. I pulled this right out of the work that we were doing. We were writing about writing, and we said words are powerful tools. And then I got on to this other point, and she goes, so we'll do a line comment, and then she puts her initials. That's how I know that it's not just a comment that I had made or commented out loud, but it was actually her trying to talk to me. And she says, hey, look, the next point, this is the wrong section, so you need to go move this. So this is a really interesting thing. Now, if you imagine if we didn't have sentence per line, how can she get her comment in between two sentences. You can't squeeze it in there. And because we have the same limitations as writing source code, we're working with plain text. Okay, we're in situ, we're in the source. We can't put something in the margins because there is no margins, right? Everything is in the document itself. So this allows us to have margins, so to speak. The other thing that we do is rewrites. So when you're writing, you get to a point where you say, this sentence isn't working, comment, let me try to rewrite it. No, that didn't work, comment, rewrite it. So I'll rewrite a sentence like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times trying to get it right. But I didn't delete the other ones, so I can go back to my other work. You know what? I think I had it number 2. Number 2 is it. Let's put that in. I uncomment all this, the ones I want to keep, delete all the others, and I move forward. So this is really an interesting way of being able to talk to your, because we're negotiating with our brain. It's like, how can I get these sentences out of here? And I say, let me just, take a deep breath, rewrite the sentence. Nope, that didn't work. Take a deep breath, rewrite the sentence. Okay, I got it that time. And then you get in. So that's why I'm saying I can't write now without this, because I have to do this. So, speaking of getting stuck, I want to share with you a trick I've used my entire life. And it's funny because it's one of those tricks where as I was thinking about creating this talk, I said, you know what? I didn't even realize I was doing this. And I don't know that I ever really told anyone about it. But people often say, when you write, your words are very inspirational. They're very moving. How do you do that? And I said, how do I do that? Well, we all have the ability to be creative. We're all musicians. We're all writers, etc. But the ones that can do it versus the ones that can't do it are the ones that find that inspiration to get it to come out, right? We call them creatives. But everyone's creative. It's just a matter of whether they're good at it or not. So, how do you get creative? Well, you get creative by being inspired. And one of the ways that you get inspired in writing is you see words that inspire you. So, we are very connected with words. So, when we hear a certain word, we feel an emotion, right? And that's an amazing thing. So, but when we're writing, how do we hear words? I mean, you can kind of imagine, some people say, I have a voice in my head. Okay, so not all of us are that lucky where we just have something in the back of our head and we're just transcribing what it's saying. So how do we hear ideas? So ever since grade school, I always sat with a thesaurus at my side. So a thesaurus will basically say, these are words that are like that word. And I kind of use the word a little differently than most people. I use the word thesaurus as these are associated words. Like, this doesn't actually mean that. These are just, and I think that kind of we've gotten to the point with some of the tools where that's kind of what the thesaurus is. It's like related words, okay? Not just exact definitions, but very, very big. So nowadays, I don't use that. I use an online tool. I particularly like Power Thesaurus right now. And Power Thesaurus is awesome because the bigger the corpus of words, the more effective the tool is. Because we need to get lots of words in front of your face. Okay? And I'll explain why in a second. But first I want to say, so I want to defend the thesaurus. So some people would tell me, like when I was younger, they said, how do you write? And I said, I use a thesaurus. And they said, well, that's a terrible idea because it's going to cause you just to use big words that you don't know, and your writing is going to sound unnatural, and you'll have lost your voice. Okay, first of all, that's bullshit. Don't listen to those people because that's just not what we do as humans. That is not going to happen to you. A thesaurus is not about trying to find big words. It's about trying to find the word that you know is there, it's in your head, but you just can't think of it right now. And a lot of times we get disrupted in our writing because we're writing along and a word comes which we're like, I forget. So imagine for a second, going back to that idea, you're talking to people and you're telling this story and you forgot the word. And it's like you pause for a second and then you realize that you're just standing there saying nothing and that you get anxious and your heart starts beating faster, right? And you're hoping that your brain this word is going to come to you. And then you may kind of go down a different path and say, okay, I'll just say it another way. But you're frustrated because I know that I was going to say something, but I can't figure out what it is. Okay, so this is happening when we're writing all the time. So when you write, you're kind of listening to yourself think, just like if you were speaking to someone, and you're writing down what's coming to you. But, like I said, just like when you're standing there, when you're writing, what do you do when you can't find that word? Are you going to let it disrupt you? So that's where we enter the thesaurus. So the way that I do this is that whenever this happens, I'll pick a symbol, so I use like percent signs, and I say, so let's take a simple example. Words, something people. So we want to say something about words like inspire people or something. There's a word there. And as you're writing, you're like, I know what word I want, and I want it to be good, but I can't figure out what it is right now. So what I do is I leave a placeholder, because I know that there's a word there that I want, and the sentence now has structure. And this may be a much longer sentence, but we're taking a very short example. Okay, so what do? So then what we do is we open up Power Thesaurus, and we start shopping. Because what we're doing is we're ruffling through the closet of our mind, and we're trying to find the word that has the meaning that we know is there. We sense the meaning that we want, we just don't know what the word is yet. So what you're doing is you're getting your brain, okay, so if your brain sees the word that it wants, it'll recognize it. Okay, so how do we recognize something if we're not looking at it? So we have to start shopping, and we have to go through and look at words and words and words and words. So we start paging through all of the results. In this particular case, let's say we say, oh, well, it's close to inspire, but that's not the word I want. It's close to inspire. 532 words, okay, it's got to be in there. So this is partly sort of a conscious and unconscious sort of negotiation in your mind to find the words that you want. And so here's what we do. So we shop, and you want to listen to yourself say the sentence with each word that kind of comes up in the list. Now, I don't have the screenshot, but imagine that it's giving us like a bulleted list of all these words. So we say, words blank people, words this people. No, that's not, that sounds good, but I would never say that. So that goes back to people saying, you're just going to pick big words. No, you're not, because you still want to say it. You're writing the documentation. You're writing the stuff down. You're not going to pick someone else's words. You're going to pick words that you have. So because we are emotionally connected to words, we won't pick words that don't make sense. Okay? And so finally, we try them all out, and we say, words blank people, words move people. Yes, that's what I want. I wanted to say that they move people. They get them to act. That's what I wanted to sort of get across. Okay? So this is very, very powerful. Now, I use this all the time. And I also use it in kind of another way. If I don't know what I want to write about, sometimes I'll start browsing through the thesaurus just to see words. Because me seeing the words makes me inspired sometimes. Certain words that have some sort of a memory, they're linked to a memory, they can get me going. So I kind of always keep Power Thesaurus open. I'm always looking through words. Now, you will learn words. So that's good. You're expanding your vocabulary. You'll be like, oh, I didn't know that word, what that means. That's kind of interesting. It sounds cool, but I don't know what it means, so you look it up. So you will expand your vocabulary. I don't think you'll use words before they're natural for you to use them, but I do believe that you're not going to learn words if you don't start seeing them. So it's a great tool to become a better writer anyway. Now, if your brain still isn't making the connection, even with the thesaurus, but you've looked at it, and you're not sure, take a walk, take a shower, go do something. Your brain oftentimes writes when you're not in the writing pose. And the further away you are from the writing, the more likely your brain is going to sort of just be relaxed, and it'll start thinking of sentences, and it'll start putting something together. But the element here is time. So time is a beautiful, beautiful thing, because we often want to push ourselves to say, write it now, write it later. But decide that you want to write it now, and then let your brain write it later. So you have to make that initial decision. Somehow you communicate to your subconscious, I do want you to come up with something, at some point here. So I'm putting this on a background task. So perhaps it's your brain rewarding you for taking a break, right? You go up for a walk, you go out, and it's like, oh, now I know what I want to say. Okay, and then you run back to your computer and jot it down. So, as you're kind of writing, there's another thing that you can do to sort of motivate yourself. So we talked a lot already about coming up with words, coming up with the idea to write. But I want to focus on that word that I just used, reward. You do have to reward yourself. You want to feel like you accomplished something. So the preview is a very important tool when you're writing, because the preview does two things. One, it kind of helps you convince yourself that you've actually accomplished something, and it gives you the big picture, the reader's view of, if you will, of what you're writing. So I always keep the preview open, or I toggle to a preview, just to kind of convince myself that I am getting somewhere. So inside of AsciiDoc ecosystem, we have a lot of tools where, just like you might have in an IDE, you have in the left-hand pane, you have the source editor, and in the right-hand pane, you have the visual output. And so this is one approach to it. There's a lot of ways to get a preview. My personal favorite, though, is the Chrome extension. So the Chrome extension, you can visit any local or remote AsciiDoc document, and so you don't normally see this. So I'm showing you this. This is what you would normally see if you don't have the Chrome extension installed. You would see the raw source. Now, AsciiDoc is designed to be so that you can read the raw source, but I think that if you really want to get in the reader's shoes and get the big picture, you need to see the published result. So if you install the extension, instead what you see is this. You actually get to see the rendered document. And nothing really motivates you more than seeing your work published. That's a very, it taps into the ego, your ego. And so this is great because you're hacking yourself, you're hacking your brain, if you will, to get back to doing more of this. So that's one approach to the idea of visualizing what you're writing. But there's a whole other part too, and it's about visualizing the changes. So and this kind of gets into when you're writing with other people. So if you're collaborating with people, you want to see what has changed. Now, think about this for a second. Imagine writing source code, and you don't have version control system, but you have a whole team of people working on the source code, all right? And you change something, and someone comes up to you and says, "Oh yeah, I changed all this. I changed a bunch of source code that you were working on yesterday." I mean, panic would set in if you had no revision control system, because you're like, wait a minute, you undid my work? Okay. So this is even worse in writing, because we're very, very passionate about the writing that we do. So you write sentences and people are like, oh yeah, I deleted all those paragraphs, they weren't good. And you're like, no, don't take it away from me. And so I think that this is very important, that you once you've written it and checked it into Git, it's always there, okay? So you kind of get afraid to edit it. All right, and this is the other part of writer's block that we have, is that we've written something once, a rough draft, and we're very proud of it, right? We spent time doing it, we put invested our life into writing that draft, and we're trying to edit it, and we say, no, I'm just going to keep it how it is, because I don't want to lose what I've already accomplished that was so hard. But you put it into a source control system, and you say, I can always go back. I can always go back to a previous version. I didn't lose anything. Nothing is really deleted. So source control gives you the ability to have diffs. So just as important for writing as it is for code. So here's an example here where, let's say we were collaborating and we go up on GitHub. So we can see that, okay, I can see what change you made. Maybe we can even reuse the workflows we use for code, and say, don't just edit the documents. Please send a pull request. Please send a change request. I want to be able to review it before it goes in. Okay, so now you feel like, as a team, you're not stepping on each other's toes, and documentation doesn't become this horrible thing, and you don't feel so guarded about what you wrote. Now, this feature is nice in one way, but at the same time, it's hard to see what the end user is going to see, the effect of the change. So it's like we're looking at the source code, but we can't see the effect that it has. So in a sense, it's like it doesn't have, we can't test the waters of the reader's change. So GitHub actually has this really cool feature called a rich diff. So it renders the two documents, and then it shows you what effectively that change looks like when it's rendered. So this is a beautiful thing. Now, if you use some of the techniques that I've had before, a sentence per line, comments in that, all that comes through as well. So all this stuff starts to marry together. And this is truly powerful. So I think that with these two views, right, you never feel that panic again that you're losing something that you've invested in writing, because it gets to be part of the version control system just like you use for source code. Now, the other part of this is that once you see that you've done your work, yes, you previewed it locally. Yes, you've sent a pull request or whatever, you've sent it into the change system. But what you ultimately want is to see it published out into the world. So this is where we go back to the beginning. This is where the automation thing comes in. So because you're in plain text, and it's just source code, right? Then we can combine these things into the automation pipelines that we already have. So there's no reason why when you push your source code to a tag, then maybe it cuts a release and your source code goes out and gets deployed, maybe through continuous delivery or however else. But you know that all I have to do is push my changes, and all the rest is automated. We can do the exact same thing for writing. So now, for instance, when I make changes and push it to the ASCII Doctor website or my company's website, I just push my change, and then magic happens. Travis does its thing. The CI tool does its thing, Hudson, Jenkins, whatever it might be that you're using, and magically, it's updated. And I think that, I've heard in the past a lot of people say, oh, you should use a CMS because a CMS has like a publishing tool. You have the most powerful publishing tool you can possibly imagine with Git combined with CI servers. Why do you need anything else? Okay? And plus build tools. Okay, so you again, but the beautiful part is that if you want to be able to write technical documentation, it can't be a foreign tool that you hate. It has to be a tool that you know. And if we do this, if we write in plain text and we store it in Git and all this thing, then we go, that's just source code to me. I don't know, I'm writing sentences instead of lines of code, but I still use all the same tools, and I'm still in my zone. So again, we keep ourselves writing fluently by being comfortable. And nothing's more comfortable than the tools that we know. Okay, so you've written it all. And I'll leave you with this last tip, which absolutely is the trick, I think, to going from good to great with your writing. So you use all the tools, and we have writing, but now you want to make it great writing. And use a technique that I came up with by sort of accident, and I call it couch reading. So the best way to get a big picture view of what you've written, catch all those little tiny errors while editing, is do what I call couch reading, which is you go get your drink, your coffee or your tea or your beer or whatever it is, and you get your phone and you go find your couch. Okay, we all have our couch, our place where we like to sit and chill. And bring up your document and start reading it through. Now, there's a couple of key things here. First of all, that you are away from your computer and that you're reading on a small screen. So don't bring your laptop, okay? Don't bring your laptop for a couple of reasons. First of all, the whole idea is to get away from your laptop. And the smaller screen actually focuses your attention. So humans can only focus on, they only have one locus of attention. So the point there is that if you're focusing on me, you can't focus on the slide, okay? This is just a limit that we all have. So if you're at your desktop, you cannot focus on reading because you have so much other crap going on. So you need to get away from your desktop, away from your laptop. And you want to make your document the locus of your attention. So when you're at your, when you're at the couch, yes, okay, turn off Twitter, whatever, don't look at that stuff. But the point is that it generally, the mobile apps tend to run full screen, so that you have the whole thing is dedicated just for that thing. So you're horizontal, you're on the couch, you're relaxing. Now, you start to read the document. Immediately, the first thing you think is, wow, this is shitty. That's going to be the first thought that you have. And the reason is because you're far from being able to change it, so all of a sudden you're vulnerable. And you are reading your words, and you know that someone else is reading those words, and you feel like the pain that you're putting them through with that sentence, okay? And you can't fix it. So, and you start reading it, and you go, oh, man, this is terrible. It's like if you've ever watched, oftentimes speakers will say, I never watch myself speak because it's so painful. Yeah, but I'm making all of you listen to me. So it's pretty bad that I go, I can't listen to myself, but I'll make you listen to me. So this allows you to be your reader before you send it to your reader, okay? And what you'll do is you'll get this idea that, wow, okay, the structure doesn't work, but I know how to fix it because I know that this felt wrong, and so now I know I go back to my computer and I have a task, I have a goal. So I strongly encourage that you couch read all your documents. Maybe not all your emails, right? Okay, we don't have to be so serious about everything we write, but do this, okay? And it's truly, I think, brings this full circle, because what it does is it allows you to think, what is this document really making me, connect with the thing that I am learning about? I don't know. When you're at your desktop, you're still thinking to yourself that there's a chance that it's not the final version yet, and it's sort of like the difference between when you commit something to the source control system, and then someone comes in and says, we're doing a release. Like, oh wait, well, if we're doing a release, I have to make a bunch of changes. But I would have just left it, the repository, the way it was had you not said that. So it brings that sense of urgency. So again, it allows you to focus. Now, the other benefit of it is that typos absolutely cannot slip through this crack. I'm telling you, I find typos that amaze me. I find typos and stuff that I've read 20, 50, 100 times, and I sit down on the couch, bring up my phone, and immediately the first thing I do is I notice that word is spelled wrong. Okay? Because you're looking so narrowly at the words that there's absolutely, like, the error just glares on the screen. So you go, okay, I'll write back and fix it. Mm-hmm. So the key is that you start to notice those little things when there's nothing else. And it's interesting that one of the things that you may notice that I'm doing in my slides here even is that I'm not giving you a lot of content. I'm not delivering you a lot of content. You can't read while you're listening to me, right? You can't be looking at that and doing this. So again, it's that same thing. It's benefiting from your being able to have that direct focus and not letting yourself get distracted, not letting that locus of attention getting pulled out to doing something else. So you're going to notice those things. And this, let me tell you, is absolutely a lifesaver, because it saves you so much embarrassment for you to find that typo than it is for you to realize that you just published that blog entry and put it on Hacker News or wherever else and the title's spelled wrong. Okay? So it's going to save you a lot of embarrassment, I promise. Couch read your documents. So to review, we're going to write in plain text. And to get started, ask yourself questions. Answer those questions. Okay? Just like imagine someone coming up to you and asking you a question if you can't think of one. Use the sentence per line technique. Try it out. You can do it in ASCII Doc. It actually works in Markdown as well. You can use this in a number of different languages. Then that allows you to use line comments, or you can just comment out whole sections. Use comments like you use them in source code. When you're writing, don't let yourself get stuck. As a matter of fact, if you're having like a really bad writing day and most of your document becomes percent signs, that's better than you just staring at the screen and having done nothing, because at least you have an outline of what you're trying to write. And some days the words will come to you, and some days they just won't. Use techniques to reward yourself by visualizing that you're making progress. I mean, a big thing in writing is like you feel like you're getting nowhere, so reward yourself. And use version control to collaborate, and then couch read. So that's all the tips for today. So basically, if you use these techniques, I promise you that you'll make some progress in your writing, more so than perhaps you've had in the past in getting stuck. Pull them out when you need them, and learn to love writing. Because that's the best brain hack that you can have, is to convince your brain that this is not a crappy thing to do, this is not a hard thing to do, but that writing is easy, that writing is fun, because then it'll want to do it. So allow yourself to enjoy the art of writing. Thank you.